It was a cold and quiet night. The wind moved gently through the dark trees. The only sound was the soft buzzing of a small drone flying above the forest. A man named Leo was watching the drone's camera on his screen. He was a forest explorer and loved to test new technology alone. Leo smiled as the drone flew higher. "Perfect signal," he said, but suddenly the screen turned black. Leo frowned. "What? Lost connection?" Then something strange happened. The screen blinked and showed a strange message in glowing green letters. "Help May. I'm lost. She is in danger." Leo sat straight. "What is this? A joke?" Another message came. "Please, I need a human." Leo grabbed his flashlight and ran out of his cabin. The signal came from the old side of the forest, the part no one visited anymore. His boots hit the ground hard as he moved faster. After 15 minutes he saw something ahead. A round silver object had crashed between the trees. It was glowing with blue lights and smoke was coming out. It didn't look like anything from Earth. Leo slowly stepped forward. "Is this a spaceship?" Then he heard a soft sound. Like someone crying, he moved closer and saw a small figure sitting beside the broken pod. It was a young alien boy, maybe 10 years old in human years. His skin was light blue, his eyes big and glowing. He wore a thin suit that was ripped and burned. The boy looked at Leo with fear. He was shivering. Leo raised his hands. "Hey!" "It's okay, I'm not here to hurt you." The boy stared for a second. Then he spoke in a clear, soft voice. "Are you a human?" Leo nodded slowly. "Yes, I am." The boy's eyes filled with hope. "Then you can help me. Please, my mother is taken. She is in danger." Leo's mind was racing. He had never seen anything like this. A real alien in the middle of his forest, asking for help? He sat down on a rock near the boy. "What's your name?" The boy looked down. "Zar, I'm from a planet far away. My ship crashed here while I was trying to escape." Leo asked gently, "Escape from what?" Zar's voice shook. "Bad people. They took my mother. They put her in chains. She's a slave now. Please, I need help to save her." Leo didn't know what to say. It sounded crazy, but the boy's face was full of pain and truth. He wasn't lying. Then Zar pulled something from around his neck, a small round device. He touched it, and a blue hologram appeared in the air. It showed a woman, also an alien, screaming and being pulled by dark, shadowy guards. Her arms were chained, and her eyes were filled with fear. Leo felt something in his chest. This was real. "Where is she?" Leo asked. Zia answered, "A place called Delta 7, a prison planet, very far from here." Leo sighed. "I've never heard of that, but even if I believe you—" "Why me?" Zar looked into his eyes. "Because you found me. And because my people say humans still have kindness." Leo stood up and looked at the stars above. He had never been more confused in his life, but also never more curious. "All right, Zar," he said. "You can come with me. Let's fix this together." Zar smiled. For the first time, as they walked back to the cabin, something moved in the trees behind them. A tiny black drone watched them silently, its red eye blinking. Someone else knew that Zar was here. The night was still dark, but the stars above shone like tiny fires in the sky, and the forest was quiet except for the soft crunch of leaves under Leo's boots as he walked with Zar beside him, holding the strange glowing device in his small blue hands and his eyes wide as he looked around the human world for the first time. Leo's cabin was old but strong, made of thick wood with solar lights glowing on the roof and an antenna pointing at the stars, and inside it was warm and full of strange earth tools and screens and machines that Leo used for his forest research. Zar stepped inside, slowly looking around with wonder as if the place was a palace, and touched a small toy robot on the shelf and smiled for a second before his face turned serious again. Leo poured water into 2 cups and gave one to Zar, who took it carefully and drank, like he had been thirsty for days, and then sat down near the table and placed the locket on it inside. The locket, the hologram, had stopped showing his mother and was now blinking red, like it was waiting for something. So Leo pulled out a small toolkit and began to connect wires and open tiny panels, while Zar watched nervously, his hands shaking a little. After a few minutes, the locket made a soft chime and a blue map appeared. in the air spinning slowly and full of alien symbols that glowed and moved like stars in a strange language that Leo could not understand. Zar touched one of the glowing points and said, "This is Delta 7, the prison world where the bad ones keep. My mother and many others, they work in machines and never see the sky again." Leo asked, "How far is this place from Earth?" And Zar replied, "Far, but not too far if we use the right path through the shadow rings and ion trails." Then he paused and added, "But we need a ship and my pod is broken beyond repair." Leo looked at the map and then at Zar and asked, "How do you read this language?" And Zar said, "My father taught me before he was gone." And then silence filled the room for a few seconds. Suddenly, a red dot appeared on the map, blinking fast near the image of Earth, and Zar's face turned pale as he whispered, "They found me. They know I am here." Leo jumped to the window and scanned the forest outside, but saw nothing yet, and then moved quickly to lock the doors and activate the cabin's shield system made from his old military tech. Zar walked to the corner and pulled his small hands together, focusing, and then a glowing circle appeared in the air and floated like light made from thought. And Leo stared at it amazed and asked, "What is that?" And Zar replied, "A protection orb, but I can only use one each day." Then a sound came from outside like a soft whistle, and Leo checked his screen and saw a shape in the sky, something flying low and silent with red lights scanning the ground like a hunter searching for a target. Zar said, "We need to move," and Leo nodded and opened a hidden panel on the floor, revealing a small passage leading to an underground lab where he kept his old research ship, now half-built and dusty. They climbed down fast, and Zar looked at the ship with wide eyes and asked, "Will this fly?" And Leo smiled and said, "If you help me, maybe it will." They worked together for hours, with Zar using his energy touch to power broken wires and Leo fixing the old engine and installing the alien map into the ship's system, and slowly the machine came to life with a low hum that shook the ground. Softly, just then, a loud bang came from above, and Leo's cabin camera showed two dark figures entering with weapons in hand and scanning the room, and Zar grabbed Leo's arm and said, "They are called shadow hunters. They do not stop until they find what they want." Leo rushed to close the last hatch and started the engine, and the underground floor opened slowly, revealing a hidden path to the surface on the other side of the hill, far from the attackers. As they launched the ship into the sky, Zar looked back through the small window and whispered, "I hope they didn't take anything from your home." And Leo replied, "Only thing that matters now is getting your mom back." The stars opened above them like a road, and the map on the screen showed the way through strange space paths and unknown danger, and Zar said, "This will not be easy." And Leo answered, "Good, I like a challenge." Far behind them, a small black drone sent one final message before it exploded silently in the wind, its job complete, and its master watching from another world with a cold smile. The stars above were like moving lights as Leo's ship flew through space, leaving Earth behind and heading toward the unknown, and beside him, Zar sat quietly staring at the glowing map with worried eyes, his small fingers tapping the screen showing Delta 7 still far away. Inside the ship it was quiet, only the low hum of the engine filled the air, and the lights blinked slowly like a heartbeat. And Leo looked at Zar and asked if he was okay, and Zar nodded but said nothing, as if something heavy was pressing inside his chest. Then, without warning, the lights in the ship turned red, and the ship shook like it had been hit by a strong wave, and Leo grabbed the controls and shouted, "Hold on," while Zar tightened his seatbelt and looked through the window. From the dark side of space, three shadowy ships appeared, flying fast and sharp with long black wings and red engines burning like fire, and each ship had a strange symbol on the side, a claw holding a chain. Zar's voice was low but firm. "Those are the hunters. They found us again." And Leo asked, "How?" And Zar replied, "They can track energy, and my powers leave a trail." Leo pushed the ship faster, dodging a blast of red light that missed by just a little, and the whole ship tilted hard, and Zar screamed as his head hit the side, and Leo pulled him back into the seat quickly. The enemy ships surrounded them like wolves, and one of them sent a voice message that echoed in the cabin saying, "Surrender the child or be destroyed." And Zar's face turned pale, but Leo looked at him and said, "We are not giving you to anyone." Zar stood up and walked to the back of the ship, opening a small box and pulling out a strange crystal that glowed with a soft blue light, and he held it with both hands and closed his eyes, and the crystal started to float. Leo shouted, "What are you doing?" And Zar said, "I will give us one shot, but you must aim it right." And Leo turned the ship straight toward the biggest hunter ship and waited. Zar opened his eyes and threw the crystal into a small core, and suddenly a bright light burst from the ship like a beam of blue energy, hitting the enemy directly, and the hunter ship exploded into dust, and the others pulled back in fear, but Zar fell to the ground breathing hard, his energy gone, and Leo lifted him gently, placing him back in the seat, and the ship slowed down to normal speed while the other two enemy ships flew away, disappearing into dark space. Zar looked weak and tired, and Leo asked, "What was that power?" And Zar replied, "I can only use it once in a cycle, and now I must rest or it will hurt me more." Leo nodded and turned the ship toward a nearby moon to land and hide for a while, and the surface was cold and quiet, with sharp rocks and silver ground, and the sky above full of strange stars. They walked outside in suits, and Leo scanned for signals while Zar rested against a rock, his face calm but his mind full of pain and memory. And then he said softly, "I didn't want to tell you, but those hunters, they are not just soldiers, they work for someone bigger, someone who owns Delta 7. Leo asked who, and Zar looked up and said, "His name is Morvex, and he is the one who took my mother and who wants to use me for something worse." And Leo felt a chill as he heard the name, like it carried a dark weight. They returned to the ship, and Leo checked the systems and found damage in the shield and engine, but said, "I can fix it with time." And Zar said, "Then we must hurry, because Morvex never waits long." Later that night, while Zar slept, Leo walked to the back of the ship and stared at the stars and thought about how strange life had become, from a quiet forest to flying in space, with a young alien boy trying to stop a powerful monster. Then his screen blinked with a message from Earth, a video showing his cabin destroyed, burned to ashes, and a symbol drawn on the ground, the same claw holding a chain. Leo clenched his fists and whispered, "They're sending a message, but I won't back down, and I won't let them take him far away." On Delta 7, Morvex sat in a black chamber watching a screen showing Leo and Zar flying away, and he turned to his guards and said, "Prepare the gate, we will open the sky if they get closer." Back in the ship, Zar opened his eyes slowly and said, "I had a dream." And Leo asked, "What did you see?" And Zar replied, "I saw my mother crying and a door behind her opening into fire." Leo checked the map again and saw they were halfway there, but the next zone was marked red with a warning that said, "Enter only if ready for war." He looked at Zar and said, "We go forward." And Zar replied, "We go together." Asterisk. The silence of deep space broke as Leo's ship exited warp drive near a planet that looked like a burning scar floating in the black sky, a world wrapped in red clouds and smoke, and chains of metal orbiting it like collars around a prisoner's neck. Zar stood beside Leo in the cockpit, staring at the cursed world, and whispered, "This is it. This is Delta 7, where hope sleeps and pain never ends." And Leo said softly, "Then it's time to wake it up." They flew low through thick red mist and passed over towers made of steel with long shadows stretching across the ground like giant claws, and fires burning in the distance, while machines moved slowly carrying crates full of unknown things and strange flying bots scanned the sky above like eyes without rest. Leo put the ship into stealth mode and landed behind a broken ridge near the edge of a slave colony, where screams echoed faintly through the wind, and the sound of chains dragging across the ground filled the silence like whispers from ghosts. They wore cloaks made of dark fabric to hide their faces and walked through the market, which was full of broken people selling scraps of tech and old weapons and glowing stones, while guards with cruel eyes walked with shock sticks in their hands, ready to punish any sign of rebellion. Zar's eyes kept searching every face, every corner, every movement. And then he stopped and pointed slowly at something on the ground. It was a small torn piece of cloth, green with golden lines, the same pattern his mother used to wear on her wrist when he was young. Leo picked it up and saw a drop of blood dried at the edge, and Zar held it close to his chest and whispered, "She was here. She passed this way recently. I can feel it in my bones." They followed a trail into a back alley where two alien workers were loading crates into a transport truck, and one of them dropped a small bracelet that had the same markings as the cloth, and Zar stepped forward asking, "Where did you find this?" The worker looked scared and said, "I don't want trouble, but I saw her. She was taken last cycle toward the lower camps near the machine pit, and Zar asked, "Is she alive?" And the worker only nodded once before running away into the shadows. Leo and Zar moved quickly past the main road and toward the outer zone where the land dipped into dark tunnels lit by blue fires and covered in black dust, where slaves worked all day mining strange crystals that fed the power core of the planet. Just as they reached the edge of the tunnel, a loud siren screamed across the air and red lights flashed and voices shouted in three languages. "Intruder, intruder, human detected in Zone 9, and Leo cursed under his breath and pushed Zar into the shadows. Guards rushed toward them, scanning with bright lights, and Zar held his breath while Leo activated a jamming device that froze the scanners for 5 seconds, just enough time to slide into a broken vent that led into the lower prison block. Inside the vent, it was hot and full of smoke, and every sound echoed like thunder, and the walls were covered in scratch marks and names written by prisoners who had lost all hope trying to leave a piece of their soul behind. Zar whispered, "I know this place. My father was once here, and he escaped but told me never to come near it again because it eats memories and buries dreams under chains." They reached the end of the vent and dropped into a hallway with rusted doors and flickering lights, and one of the doors was slightly open, and from inside came the sound of a voice, weak and trembling, whispering a name. Zar ran forward and pushed the door open, and inside, lying on the floor, was a woman in chains, her face tired but her eyes alive, and when she saw him she cried out, "My son!" He rushed to her and held her close, and tears fell from both eyes as Leo stepped in and watched, silently guarding the door and feeling something deep in his chest that he could not name. But before they could break the chains, a deep voice echoed from the shadows saying, "Touching reunion, but sadly short," and a figure stepped forward, tall and wrapped in black armor with glowing red eyes and a cloak made of smoke. It was Morvex, the slave master, the one who ruled Delta 7 with fear and fire, and he looked at Zar and said, "You came to me like I knew you would, and now you've brought me something even better, a human who knows how to fight." Leo pulled out a shock blade and stood in front of Zar and the woman and said, "If you want him, you'll have to go through me." And Morvex laughed a cold sound like knives and replied gladly. The walls began to shift and the door behind them closed, trapping them inside, while Morvex raised his hand and summoned chains made of energy that flew like snakes and wrapped around Leo's arm, but he broke free with a blast from his blade and charged forward. Zar shouted, "Stop, we're not ready," and his mother held his hand tightly and whispered, "You must survive no matter what." The room shook as the battle began, and outside the prison alarms continued to scream louder than before. The air inside the prison chamber burned with tension as the walls pulsed with red light and the sound of chains echoed in every corner, and Leo moved fast with his blade slicing through the energy links, trying to shield Zar and his mother, while Morvex stood still, smiling like a predator watching his prey struggle before the final bite. The floor began to lower beneath them, grinding like old metal teeth and slowly revealing a wide pit glowing with fire and filled with rows of steel cages, where hundreds of prisoners sat in silence, their eyes hollow and faces covered in dust and pain. Zar held his mother close, whispering, "I found you. I came for you," and she held his face gently and said, "You are stronger than I ever dreamed, but you must leave this place before it steals your soul." Morvex raised one hand and shadows crawled from the walls, forming into tall, armored guards with red eyes and sharp weapons, and Leo stepped forward, standing between them and Zar, his voice steady as he said, "If you want him, you'll have to fight through me again." But Morvex only smiled and waved his hand, and the floor under Leo dropped fast, sending him down a shaft into a deeper level of the prison where no light touched and only the sounds of machines and distant screams remained. Zar shouted, but the ground beneath him shifted and metal arms grabbed him and his mother, pulling them into separate cages that closed with a hiss, and Morvex's voice filled the air like poison, saying, "Now we wait." In the darkness below, Leo landed hard on a metal bridge surrounded by spinning gears and steam vents, and he stood slowly checking his wounds and looked up at the long shaft above, now sealed shut, and said to himself, "I don't care how deep this goes, I'm coming back up." He moved forward through narrow tunnels filled with broken bots and old tech and followed the sound of a weak signal on his wristpad until he found a control room flickering with old power and a broken screen that suddenly lit up, showing Zar's face for a second before fading again. Zar, meanwhile, sat inside the cage, his body aching, but his mind racing, thinking of every lesson his father had taught him about focus and fear and light, and how to bend it when all seemed lost. And he placed his hands on the floor and began to hum softly a sound from his childhood that helped him feel safe. Across the room, his mother opened her eyes and called softly, "Zar, stay awake. They will try to break you, but you must remember who you are." And Zar answered, "I won't let them win, not again." Morvex watched from above, standing inside his throne chamber, carved from dark stone and wires, his eyes fixed on the cages, and he said to his guards, "The boy will not resist much longer. The cage feeds on energy, and soon it will drain what little power he has left back in the lower level." Leo found a tool locker filled with old plasma grenades and a broken exo-arm, and he smiled, saying, "Good enough," and strapped on the arm, sparks flying as it powered up, and he punched the wall, testing it, then turned toward the nearest elevator shaft and began to climb, using the arm to break the locks one by one. Zar closed his eyes and focused, feeling the cage pulling at his lifelike cold fingers, but deep inside his chest something began to glow. A memory of his mother singing a song when he was small and afraid during the dark storms on his home planet, and he held that memory tight, letting it grow into light. Cage flickered for a second, and Morvex leaned forward, confused, saying that should not be possible, and the guard beside him said, "The energy reading is changing, it's rising, not falling," and Morvex snarled, "Then go in and stop him," just as the guards opened the chamber doors. The wall beside them exploded in a blast of smoke and metal, and Leo stepped through, covered in dust, with his blade lit and his voice clear as he said, "Miss me." The battle was fast and brutal, with Leo fighting like a man with nothing to lose, using the exo-arm to crush one guard while his blade danced through the air, and Zar broke his cage from inside, sending out a shockwave of blue light that cracked the wall. Zar ran to his mother and pulled her cage open just as Morvex descended from above with a roar of rage, his hands glowing with black fire, and he shouted, "You don't know what you are, child, you are the gate." And Zar replied, "I'm not your weapon, I'm not your tool, I'm someone's son." The ground shook as power clashed between Morvex and the boy, and Leo grabbed Zar's mother, pulling her to safety, while the two forces met in the center of the chamber, light and shadow spinning around them like stars in war. For a second everything stopped, and then a bright flash filled the air, and Morvex screamed, falling back as cracks appeared across his armor, and he vanished into smoke, leaving only silence behind. Zar fell to the floor, breathing hard, and Leo ran to him, lifting him into his arms, and his mother knelt beside him, whispering over and over, "You did it. You did it, my son." The alarms began to sound again, this time from above, as the prison core started to overload, and Leo looked around and said, "We have to move now." Together they ran toward the upper exit, while below them the fire began to rise and the walls started to fall, and far above in the sky the stars waited. Asterisk smoke chased them through the metal halls as warning lights flashed like dying stars, and every step echoed across broken ground, while Leo led Zar and his mother through a half-open tunnel with sparks falling from the ceiling and heat rising like breath from a dragon's mouth behind them. The prison core screamed like a wounded beast, the explosions still building deep underground, with each chamber cracking and folding as if the planet itself wanted to swallow everything into darkness and forget it ever existed. Zar stumbled once, and Leo caught him, holding him steady and asking, "Are you still strong enough?" And Zar nodded, his face pale but his eyes full of fire, and said, "I won't stop, not until she's safe and Morvex is gone." They reached a hidden bay buried below the upper city, where old slave transport ships were stored, rusted and locked in silence. And Leo found one that looked alive enough and forced it open, while Zar helped his mother climb inside. The ship rumbled as systems came online, and the door closed behind them, sealing them inside with a hiss and flicker, and Leo ran to the controls, checking fuel and pressure and power, all just enough to escape, but not to fight again. As the engines roared, the ground below cracked and flames burst from the broken vents, and just as the ship lifted into the air, a loud laugh echoed from the side chamber, and the door was torn open like paper, and Morvex stepped in. His body was broken, with sparks flying from his chest plate, and one eye dim, but he still stood tall, his voice cold and sharp, saying, "You think this is victory, but you've only finished the first move, and the game has barely begun." Leo pulled his blade and stood in front of Zar and his mother. "But Morvex lifted one hand and waves of black light wrapped around them, freezing time for a second and pulling Zar into the air. Like a puppet on strings, Zar's body floated above the floor, and the light around him pulsed with strange energy as Morvex whispered into the dark air, saying, "I knew you would come to save her because you are like your father, always rushing toward." The flame, never asking who lit it, Zar struggled, but his voice broke through the grip, and he said, "What are you talking about?" And Morvex walked closer slowly like a shadow, melting forward, and said, "Your father helped build the gate long ago, the gate that connects worlds, the gate I need to open." Leo shouted, "Let him go," and charged forward, but Morvex snapped his fingers and a shockwave sent Leo flying into the wall, crashing hard and blood on his forehead, and he barely stayed conscious. Zar's mother screamed no and reached for her son, but Morvex blocked her with one hand and said he was born for this. His energy is not just power, it is a key, a code built into his blood by design, not by fate. Zar's eyes widened as the truth landed heavy. And he whispered, "You used him, you used my father, and now you want me." And Morvex replied, "Not want, need, because only your light can open what has been closed, and once the gate is open, the army will come and Earth will fall just like your home." The ship shook as the fire below rose higher, but the room seemed frozen in the moment between truth and war, and Leo pushed himself to his feet, bleeding and tired, but not broken, and he said, "Maybe his father helped you, but he's not you, and he's not yours, and neither is this boy." Zar closed his eyes and focused, remembering his mother's song and his father's lessons and Leo's courage and the forest and the stars and everything that made him more than just a tool. And then light exploded from his chest, so bright it filled the chamber like a rising sun. The chains shattered, the dark cracked, and Morvex screamed as the light burned through his armor and threw him against the wall, and Zar fell into his mother's arms, breathing fast but alive and awake. Leo grabbed the controls and shouted, "We have to go now," and slammed the thrusters forward, and the ship shot into the sky. Just as the prison behind them exploded into fire and ash, and pieces of Delta 7 began to fall into the gas clouds below. Inside the ship, silence took over except the soft hum of survival and the sound of Zar's breath slowing and his mother holding him tight, while Leo sat at the front watching the stars return. After a long pause, Zar asked softly, "Is he gone?" And Leo answered, "I don't know, but he's broken, and we're free for now." But far across space, in a cold chamber lit by red moons, a single screen flickered on, and a voice said, "Plan failed. Subject escaped." And another deeper voice replied, "Then send the others. It's time they all awaken." Back in the ship, Zar held the broken piece of his father's old crystal, the one Morvex had carried, and turned it slowly in his hand as the last of the flames faded behind them and a new light rose ahead. The stars were quiet as the ship floated through deep space, wounded but alive, and inside the dim cabin Leo sat near the controls, watching the dark screen flicker with strange signals, while Zar and his mother rested in the back, holding hands for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. Outside, the window space looked endless, soft lights from distant systems, blinking like dreams waiting to be reached, and Leo thought of Earth, thought of the forest where this all began, thought of how silence used to mean peace, but now it only meant calm before something new. Zar woke slowly, his body tired, but his mind awake and full of questions, and he walked to the front holding the broken crystal that had once belonged to his father, the one Morvex had kept, the one that pulsed gently in his hands like it still held secrets it refused to tell. Leo looked at him and smiled faintly, asking, "How do you feel?" And Zar replied, "I'm still not sure if I'm me or something more." And Leo nodded, because he knew that feeling the weight of survival, the pull of destiny, the fear that peace might not last. Then the ship beeped a soft warning, and the screen lit up, showing a black ship behind them, far in the distance, not chasing, not firing, just following like a shadow that wanted to be seen. Zar stared at the signal and said, "It's not over." And Leo said, "Maybe it never is," and then asked, "Do you want to go home?" And Zar looked down, then up, and said, "I don't know where home is anymore." His mother walked to them and touched his shoulder, saying, "Home is not a place, it's who you choose to protect, and who protects you back." And Zar looked at her eyes and nodded slowly, understanding what he had never fully heard before they reached a small moon orbiting a blue star, one that Leo used to mark as a safe zone years ago, back when he believed in maps. More than people, and they landed near a quiet valley with soft light and calm winds and no signs of war or fire or chains for a moment. They were just people breathing fresh air and feeling solid ground under tired feet, and Zar smiled as he picked up a smooth stone and tossed it into the air, and it hovered for a second, then dropped, and he laughed for the first time without fear. Behind his teeth, Leo sat near the edge of a cliff looking at the wide sky above, and Zar joined him, asking, "Do you think Morvex will return?" And Leo said, "Maybe, or maybe someone worse," and then he said, "But if he does, he won't find us weak or alone." Then Zar opened the crystal, and a new light poured out, not dangerous, not dark. Just a path, a map stored deep inside that pointed somewhere far and unknown, and when Leo saw it, he said, "What is that?" And Zar answered, "Maybe the truth about what I really am." His mother stepped closer and whispered, "Then we follow it together." And Leo looked at both of them and said, "Then I guess I'm not going home yet either." And they all smiled because for once the road ahead did not feel like a trap, but a choice as. The ship rose again into the sky. Zar looked back at the small moon and whispered thank you to the silence, and then turned to the stars, letting the crystal guide the way forward as the engines hummed with quiet hope. But across the galaxy, in the shadow of a dying star, a council of dark eyes watched a screen showing Zar's light, and one of them said, "The gate is not closed, it is only hidden," and another replied, "And the child has not chosen a side yet." Back in the ship, Leo opened a new log entry saying, "Day 1 after Delta 7, child and mother alive mission. Unclear but worth continuing." And then he closed the screen and leaned back, feeling something in his chest that almost felt like peace. Zar sat near the window watching the stars move like rivers and asked, "Do you think people will believe our story?" And Leo smiled and said, "Probably not." And Zar laughed and said, "Good, I want it to stay ours." Far behind them, the ruins of Delta 7 floated in fire and metal, silent at last, and free of chains for the first time in ages, and the souls once trapped there had begun to rise piece by piece, light by light, as the ship disappeared into the stars, leaving behind old pain and chasing new questions. The crystal pulsed once more and showed a symbol, not of war, not of power, but of a seed growing in a circle, as if to say the end is just the start.